Thank you, Mr. Alios. Mr. El Shafie, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. First of all, Mr. Chair, I would like to thank you for this opportunity, and I would like to thank you as well. I know, as I told you yesterday, you was one of the 4 Liberals MPs that voted for the genocide in the Parliament, and I want to thank you for this. Ms. Michelle Rambol, I thank you for being one of the engines behind this committee. Mr. Arif, it's always a pleasure meeting you. And for the rest of the members, it's always a pleasure and honor meeting all of you. Last time when I was here, we discussed the different issues of how we can help the refugees on the ground, not just through the resettlements and the immigration movement, but also on the ground, such as dealing with the source of the problem, dealing with ISIS and what they are doing on the ground, confronting some of the forces in some of these areas. We discussed as well the green zones in the land of the conflict, that we have a green zones for the minority. We discussed as well the regional resettlements. We talked about how that Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Qatar does not take any refugees, and we have to put more pressure on them to do more. But we also, I discussed as well last time when I was here, that now we understand that one of the main problems that we're facing, that the Canadian government does not have a mechanism, does not have a vehicle to deal with internally displaced personnel. We know how we have a mechanism to deal with the refugees if they are outside of their countries, but the internally displaced is something that Canadian government until now did not dealt with it properly or does not have a mechanism for it properly. As well, we have to realize that if we are just counting on UNHCR to choose the refugees for us, this is not good enough. I used to be a UNHCR refugee. I love UNHCR. They did save my life personally, but still, they cannot be the only source that we have in order to choose our refugees. We have to cooperate with the local groups. We have to cooperate with local organizations that they are on the ground, other international organizations that they also have experience with the different regions that we are dealing with. We also discussed that the Canadian government does not want to choose the refugees based on their background, religious background, or ethnical background. While I understand the principle of this, I understand from where this is coming from, but also we have to understand that this example doesn't work in every case. When we are saying that the Yazidis is being killed because they are Yazidis, we have to look at the religion. When we are saying that the Christians being killed because they are Christians, we have to look at their religious background. We cannot leave the most vulnerable minority behind simply because we want to be politically correct. This is not the time to be politically correct. They don't have the time, and we have to do something to do as much as possible. We was talking about the Rohingya. I think it was 2-3 years ago when the Canadian government took off some of the Rohingya refugees from Bangladesh, from the refugee camps in Bangladesh, and it was based on that they are Muslims refugees, on their religion. They was persecuted because they are Muslims from the Muslim community in Burma. So if we did this in Rohingya, I think we can do the same thing with the Yazidis and other minorities. Last time I spoke about a proposal that we presented to the Canadian Minister and Canadian Minister of Immigration, and I believe that we indicated in the last hearing that our proposal was ignored. After the hearing, some the Canadian media outlet took the story, include the Toronto Star. Next day, we received a phone call from the Chief of Staff. In June 17, the Chief of Staff came to our headquarters in Toronto, and we presented to him the proposal, and we had discussion with him. In the end of June, we enhanced the proposal and we presented. All of you have a copy of the proposal in English and in French. Part of the proposal, or focus, just a quick summary on the proposal itself, and instead of pointing a finger on the problem, we are trying to lend a hand. Basically, the proposal be presented by One Free World International, ORAT, Dr. Martin Mark, and Ms. Chantal Delage. Both of them is a witness on this committee in the last 2 days. And the proposal based on what we call JAS, Joint Assistance Sponsorship, which is mean that the government and the community working together hand by hand to sponsor more than 400 Yazidi girls as a first step in an order to bring them here to Canada. I'm not talking about private sponsors. I think if you have the money to bring 25,000 refugees, I think you can bring 400 Yazidi victims here to Canada. It's as simple as that. So, working together, the government and the community, in an order to bring 400 Yazidi girls that are victims, working on the ground with the locals in an order to pinpoint who they are and how we can bring them here. You have all of this in the proposal. Please feel free to ask me any question with regard to the proposal. In the end, and in the conclusion, in 1939, there was a ship full of Jewish refugees under the name St. Louis ship. At this time, we had a prime minister, his name was Mackenzie King. And Mackenzie King, his statement said, one is too many. Most of the 900 refugees that was on this ship went back again to Germany, Nazi Germany, and was killed. What's happening today, Yazidis today, is the second St. Louis ship in our Canadian history. Let's not repeat the mistake again. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. El Shafie. And now we'll hear from Operation Ezra. Will Mr. Weiss or Ms. Nasso go first? Ms. Nasso, you'll be splitting your time with Mr. Weiss.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I am here to tell you that my people are a victim of genocide based on their religious beliefs. On August 3rd, 2014, ISIS attacked the region of Shingal and began one of the most atrocious killing campaigns of the 21st century. Hundreds of thousands of people were forced to flee their homes. Many Yazidis were captured. Men, women, and children were separated from their families. Boys were forcibly converted and trained to become suicide bombers and soldiers for ISIS. As many as 5,000 Yazidi girls were taken as sex slaves by ISIS and resold across the Middle East. Girls as young as 9 years old were raped, and often more than 30 times a day. This continues. Some 3,000 remain in captivity. Many have committed suicide, and others have been murdered. Yazidi babies were taken away from their families and given to Muslim families. Men were either converted or executed on the spot in front of their families. Older women were executed, while younger women were kidnapped and forced into a widespread sexual slavery industry. ISIS justifies its campaign against the Yazidis under the banner of radical Islam. It considers the Yazidi as infidels and devil worshippers who they view as subhuman. How is this not a genocide? This is a systematic elimination of my people based on their religious beliefs. Yazidis who were lucky enough to escape the Shingal attack fled to Mount Sinjar in August of 2014. Thousands died of starvation or dehydration or exposure to the elements. Young mothers dug graves to bury their children that did not survive. Following the intervention of Western nations, tens of thousands of Yazidis were finally able to flee and settle across Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. This tragedy has left over 500,000 Yazidis as displaced persons, with well over 100,000 in UNHCR refugee camps. Did you know that these camps are segregated? This is because we are a religious minority that the Muslim world does not accept. So the UN keeps us segregated to protect us, even from other refugees. The situation of my people is desperate, and it is dire. I implore you to act to help save my people from extinction. The Yazidis have held a unique and terrible religious status in Iraq and Syria, which is different than any other group. It means we can be murdered and raped, enslaved with moral and civil impunity. Without your intervention, my people will not survive. Our religion is over 6,000 years old, and we used to number 23 million. But after 73 recorded massacres, we now number fewer than 700,000, and we are scattered across the world. We are homeless. We are hopeless. We are looking for refuge in a country that will accept us for the peaceful people that we are. Please do not make my people a history lesson for the future. My name is Nafia Nasso. I was a Yazidi refugee who came to this great country with my family over 16 years ago. Canada gave us a future. My people need courageous leaders to give them a safe haven. Canada is that country. You are these leaders, and the time is now.
Thank you, Mr. Royce.
Thank you. What we're here today is to tell you that private sponsorship of refugees is limited in its effectiveness. Operation Ezra is a Winnipeg-based private sponsorship program launched by the Jewish community of Winnipeg and now involves 20 partners, including Christian, multi-faith, Yazidi, and Jewish groups. Over the last 18 months, we have raised over $250,000, and we are sponsoring a total of 7 families, or 41 people altogether. To the best of our knowledge, we are the only private sponsorship program focused on the Yazidi people. We welcomed our first family of 8 people on Monday, July the 11th. Bringing them to Winnipeg took us a year and a half. It will likely take us another year or more to bring the remaining 6 families. The complicated and time-consuming private sponsorship refugee immigration process has just too many obstacles to be an effective solution. Applications are complicated and time-consuming. They are also limited and capped in numbers. Our project is currently on hold because of this. As well, serious bottlenecks exist in the process. There are significant waits to get interviews and medical and security screening scheduled. Refugees have to be transported to visa offices that can be hours or days away from the camps. Finally, the responsibility to save a people from genocide cannot be left in the hands of the private sector only. We cannot do enough, and we cannot do it fast enough. We need your help, and so our third and last point is that government intervention in the form of a large-scale government program is desperately needed to save the Yazidi people from extinction. The plight of the Yazidi people needs to be given priority in the face of this tragic genocide. We are proposing a hybrid program where the government brings in a large number of Yazidi families to Canada and where the private sector becomes primarily involved with settlement and integration of the refugees. Any sponsorship of refugees who are in extreme danger, such as the Yazidis, whether private or hybrid, must be given the highest priority and process with the same speed as government refugees. Canada has a unique opportunity to take action on behalf of the Yazidis and offer refuge to a people who are facing extinction. I hope and I pray that our government will see the fate of an entire people rests on our ability to do the right thing. Please, let's bring these people to safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice. Mr. Asasi, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank every witness for being here today and providing us with their moving testimony. I think I can say that I speak on behalf of every member of this committee that we are obviously very much concerned, not only about the Yazidi community, but other communities that are suffering atrocities. Now, if I could start with Reverend El Shafie. Welcome back, sir. Reverend El Shafie, you actually referenced in your remarks that Canada does not have a mechanism to deal with displaced people, in the sense that our refugee regime does not have any provisions that deal with it. Do you know of any other country that has legal provisions in their refugee nomenclature or legal framework that does deal with displaced people?
I would say Germany. Like from the top of my mind, really, Germany took over than 1,100 Yazidi girls immediately. Like the process was very fast. It happened in Kurdistan. It didn't happen in Syria or in Turkey. So I will say that Germany will be the lead country in this matter.
But other than that, you don't know of any other country that has a legal regime that allows them to assist internally displaced people?
I believe that maybe Germany and Geneva. I'm not sure. I'm sure of Germany. I'm not sure about another European countries.
Okay, thank you. And I understand that One Free World has been very active on the issue of Yazidis for some time. Would it be fair to characterize your group as a non-partisan group?
That's correct.
That's correct. And have you ever received any funding from the government?
No.
Nothing through the Office of
No.
Religious Freedom?
No.
Okay. Now, I understand that you've previously arranged trips abroad for various issues that you've been advocating. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And have there been MPs that have gone along on any of your
Absolutely.
trips?
Liberals and conservative MPs.
Okay. And I understand that obviously your interest in assisting Yazidis is long-standing. Of course, it probably extends back to August 2014 when atrocities first occurred, as we heard in the testimony today and as we read in various reports. Now, my question was that you have actually submitted proposals, and I take it. Could you tell me how many proposals you've submitted to assist?
This is the only proposal that we submitted. We enhance it. So you have the original proposal, and after the meeting with the chief of staff, we enhanced it. We improved it.
Okay. So there's been several iterations.
Been several what, sorry?
Iterations of the same proposal?
Just one. Once.
Okay. And in 2014, when the terrible atrocities were happening, did you not submit a proposal?
We was working on the ground. We did not submit proposal yet because our legal team was looking for a partner to make a proper proposal.
Okay.
It takes time.
Okay. So I'm just looking at one of your proposals, which I believe is dated June 30th.
Yes.
And you talk about the process of screening individuals on the ground in northern Iraq. As you can imagine, I think many of us are concerned that in the event a private group without a lengthy record of support, should they go to war-torn regions, as much as they're there to actually do good work and to assist, when you're helping vulnerable groups, it's very, very important to make sure that they are protected after they have been screened. I look at the proposal that you've provided us, and it says that your group is proposing to provide local protection and accommodation to people that you screen. What would that entail? I mean, it's just a passing reference in the letter, but given how vulnerable the population you're dealing with is, what exactly did you have in mind?
Well, so with regard to the protection, with regard to
After
security?
screening, first of all, it doesn't specify exactly what type of screening you'd have in mind, but also it goes on to say that you would provide local protection and accommodation once you're there.
Just to make it clear, this is a proposal to the Canadian government. They will have their own ways of accommodation. They will have their own ways of screening the refugees. We are not here to do their jobs. We are here just to propose
Absolutely.
what is the process in order for them to follow this process or to help having a map how to proceed in dangerous areas, as you indicated. With regard to security, it was very clear in the proposal that in many areas in Kurdistan, such as Arbil, is very secure areas. We have more than 400 Canadian soldiers on the ground. Many of the international delegations, they go back and forth. There is always a system, the same like what we did in Lebanon, when we have a refugee center where we can interview the people there. The bottom line here is, this is a pilot project. It will be gaps in it, I can assure you that. But we're not here to sit down with regard to small details or the logistics. Before we start all of this, we need the green light from the Canadian government. Without the green light, this is human trafficking. You understand what like if we did this without the green light from without the approval of the Canadian government, this would be a human trafficking. We need the Canadian government to approve in order to start the logistics and the steps, and then we can look at the details.
Sure. But you would also require the approval of the Iraqi government, the Kurdish regional government.
Absolutely, yes. We have their cooperation, yes.
You do? Okay.
Yes.
Obviously, I think the objectives that you have set out are incredibly laudable, but you refer to such things as small details. But these are small details that are very significant when one is dealing with individuals on the ground in a war-torn region. So you would admit that these are significant things to consider. by any government.
Absolutely is important, absolutely. And the proposal, if you read the proposal, we covered as much as possible as we can.
Sure.
But in the last 2 years, quite frankly, at least we are doing something about it. At least we are in the ground. I am going there in the region in a few days. We are dealing with the locals. We went there many times. We deal with ORAT, which is an organization that has its own repetitions. We have our lawyers, such as the lead, Ms. Chantal Delage. At least we are doing something in an order to start and to help these people as soon as possible.
Absolutely, and I think everyone shares that concern. It's just
Thank
the
you.
means that are adopted.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. El Shafie. Ms. Rempel, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank all of you on behalf of all of us here for the work that you're doing to try and solve this situation. Sometimes, you know, the temptation for us here is to get bogged down in partisan politics. I know I take the bait sometimes, but my hope is that this committee is going to actually come up with some recommendations that the government can take to see action in terms of accelerating the applications of persecuted minority groups. And certainly at the top of that list would be the Yazidi people who have been deemed to be victims of genocide. We've now heard hours and hours of testimony on this issue, and there's a few recommendations I've taken away from various groups, and I just want to put them out there, and then with the time I have remaining, just get you to respond to them to see if the list is comprehensive, if it makes sense, and then if there's anything that you have to add to the list. So the first is, we very clearly heard that we need to accelerate the refugee applications of Yazidi victims of genocide. We need to prioritize refugee applications from persecuted and ethnic minority groups and LGBTI in Canada's response to the Middle Eastern migrant crisis. We need to ask the United Nations to make changes to the refugee selection process in order to accelerate applications for victims of genocide and highly persecuted ethnic and religious minority groups and LGBTI. We need to restore the exemption for Syrian and Iraqi refugees from the mission cap under the privately sponsored refugee program. We need to identify between 5,000 and 10,000 Yazidi victims of genocide and bring them to Canada as soon as possible as refugees, ensuring adequate support frameworks are in place for integration. And Mr. Weiss, this is where your hybrid program, I think, is compelling. And we can also look to Germany and Australia as best practice for how to do this quickly. We need to examine and implement innovative ways to identify persecuted ethnic and religious minority groups for resettlement to Canada. Mr. El Shafie, you're not the only one who's talked about the difficulties, and I accept my colleagues' comments around security. Certainly that's going to be an issue, but if the UN can't get this done quickly, how can Canada look at innovative ways to ensure that we are identifying people on the ground quickly and safely? We need to ensure adequate resources are deployed to process applications from these persecuted minority groups so that they're not waiting in our system for 5 years. One of the things I'd like to add to this is I think that many of you have significantly more expertise than we do. So one of the recommendations I would make to the minister is to establish a formal ministerial consultation group that's convened immediately to look at solutions on doing this, since many of you have results on the ground. And one of the things that we've heard that my colleague Ms. Kwan has also been advocating for is to ensure that we're tracking the number of people that we're bringing in through these programs so that we can measure the success and adequacy of the program changes that we've made. Do you think that that's a comprehensive list of recommendations, and would you care to comment on it?
Perhaps we'll proceed in the sequence that the panelists had spoken initially. So, Mr. Alice?
Yeah, I believe, yes, it is. And regarding identification of the government-sponsored refugees or government-assistant refugees, and instead of going to the United Nations and look at their pool, Canada should consult other organizations in Canada to go out and look for and identify the refugees, rather than just going after the agenda of the UNHCR.
I agree, and I have no comment.
Ms. Nasso and Mr. Weiss.
Thank you, Ms. Rempel. I agree with everything you said, and it's a good way to start, but everything we do, we have to do it fast to save these people.
Mr. Weiss.
Thank you. And if I could just build on my colleague's comments, I think the the problem with the United Nations definition of refugees has been a stumbling block. I think we have to look beyond that and get away from definitions and look at the fact that Canada has played for the last number of decades a strong role acting in a humanitarian way, and we have to disregard the definition and move quickly. Particularly, the most accessible refugees right now are in Turkey, and the situation in Turkey is unstable. And if we have to wait a year to get these folks out, I'm not sure we're going to have access to them.
One of the genesis of this committee and the impetus for us to sit here on a beautiful summer day and at the end of July is that, you know, certainly I feel that we can't wait until the House resumes in the fall to take actions. Given your experience with the direness of the situation on the ground, what do you think, what time frame is acceptable for action?
I believe the time is immediately, but the time frame in the next 2 months, if we can start to move, like if we can start right now and we start to receive the first refugee, because the timeline, I would say between a month and a half to 2 months.
Mr. Weiss?
Well, we have to move very quickly on the ground. Right now, we just got notification that our 5th and 6th families had their applications approved by the government. Those applications were in November, and they still have to go through an interview process and other checks. So we have to move very quickly, and I would say 2 months is a time frame to begin. And we've shown that we can move quickly in dealing with the Syrian refugees. So we're not creating something new. We're just applying that same model to a different group of people.
Very quickly, my hope, we as part of this committee, typically the committee would produce a report that's tabled in the House of Commons. We actually don't have the mechanism to do that because Parliament's in recess. My hope is that the committee can produce a letter to the Minister with recommendations. Did the list of recommendations that I just put forward, is that comprehensive? Would that something that you'd like to see government members support in a letter to the Minister?
Yes, from my side.
Mr. Weiss?
Yes, most definitely.
Ms. Nasso?
Absolutely.
Mr. Allos? Thank you. That's all the questions that I have.
Thank you. Ms. Kwan, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank all the witnesses for their presentation. I'd like to just add, actually, a number of other suggestions in terms of consideration for the government. And as we've heard from many witnesses on this important issue. So here are my thoughts on this. One is for the government to take immediate actions in response to the declaration that a genocide is being committed, and that under Section 25 of the IRPA for humanitarian compassionate considerations, that we support recommendations from witnesses to immediately begin bringing over Yazidis to Canada with an ultimate target of 5,000 to 10,000. That in the very near term, utilizing the databases compiled by groups that appeared, 3,000 to 4,000 could be immediately brought to Canada, and that these are identified victims of genocidal actions such as human trafficking, sexual slavery, rape, torture, widowed women, orphans. That it is also estimated that there are 3,000 to 4,000 in the Turkish camps right now, and action needs to be taken with respect to that. Due to the extraordinary event that is a genocide, groups brought over in response to a genocide would not count as part of the immigration plan levels, so as not to prevent other individuals from making legitimate claims. On the question around humanitarian aid, it has been identified that food shortages are significant in refugee camps in the region, and the asks are quite easy, in fact. And they're asking for flour, rice, and oil. Electricity by way of generators is also a significant issue due to the extreme conditions like heat. Medicine and clothes are also issues in terms of immediate need for humanitarian aid. It was also brought to our attention that there are issues on the distribution of the humanitarian aid due to issues of corruption and discrimination, and that the aid is not reaching to the most vulnerable. So in light of that, the government be asked to work more closely with credible established NGOs in the region to deliver the aid directly into the camps. That there was also an ask from the Yazidi groups that appeared before the committee, and this took place in a private meeting with me, so it wasn't before committee, for direct cash resources to be provided to the victims
and that they were recommending $1 million of direct cash resources to be spread amongst the Yazidis population as an initial action. Processing delays, that Canada still lacks the ability to process cases in northern Iraq, which is where many Yazidis, amongst many other refugees, are located, and that the UNHCR has